Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a seriously fascinating journey into the very foundations of how we learn, how we teach, and ultimately how we shape human minds. We are looking at a profound synthesis of global educational philosophies, basically breaking down the historic barriers between the East and the West. If you've ever sat in a classroom and felt that, well, everything was incredibly efficient, it was maybe lacking a certain depth, well, this exploration is going to be incredibly revealing for you.
So is modern education actually missing its soul? It's a massive, powerful question. Because, when we look past the mechanical structures of modern classrooms, we're talking the standardized tests, the rigid bells, the endless grading rubrics, we start to realize something much deeper might be missing from the way we learn. We are producing incredibly smart, capable individuals, sure, but are we producing whole, grounded human beings? That exact tension is what we're unpacking today.
Here is our roadmap for The Explainer. We'll start with the global education gap, then explore Western philosophy as the body of education and Indian philosophy as the soul. After that, we'll see how bridging the East and West plays out in the real world with India's NEP 2020, and finally, we'll build out a 21st century toolkit.
All right, Section 1, the global education gap, isolated silos of thought. The core problem we're facing today really comes down to these isolated silos. In global academic circles, we tend to look at Eastern and Western philosophies completely separate from one another. Western educational philosophy gets evaluated entirely on its own merits, and Indian philosophy is kind of just confined to domestic or historical contexts. So to bridge that gap today, we're using a qualitative comparative analysis of existing literature. By looking at historical records and peer-reviewed journals across both of these traditions, a really fascinating dialectic emerges.
Moving right along to Section 2. The body, Western philosophy. Think of the Western tradition as the structural, scientific framework of global learning, the bones, if you will, and its core tenets are deeply, deeply rooted in individualism. Western systems prioritize individual autonomy above almost everything else. The goal is to create independent learners who rely heavily on rational inquiry and empirical knowledge. So the focus is squarely on scientific thinking, logic, democracy, and critical thinking. The ultimate endgame here is what we call scientific humanism, using empirical knowledge to aggressively advance human progress and protect individual rights. It's a highly structural, very external approach to the world.
Now, what's really interesting here is how these big, abstract concepts were built by specific foundational thinkers over time. For instance, you've got John Dewey, who literally revolutionized progressive education by pushing for interactive, hands-on, inquiry-based learning. Then, there's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who laid the groundwork for modern student-centered education. He insisted we actually match learning to a child's natural development. Going way further back, Plato advocated for a balanced curriculum, combining academics, ethics, and sports to develop both the mind and the body. And more recently, Paulo Freire brought us critical pedagogy, focusing on dialogue and participatory teaching to truly empower the individual. These thinkers collectively built the highly effective structural body of our modern schools.
Which brings us nicely to Section 3, the soul, Indian philosophy.
Now, body absolutely needs a soul that truly live, right? And that brings us to the other half of our educational synthesis. If the West focuses heavily on the external and the individual, the Indian tradition historically looks inward, and it leans toward the collective. The defining concept here is Atmajnana, which translates to self-realization. Indian educational philosophy is deeply, fundamentally connected to spirituality. It prioritizes holistic learning. That means it doesn't just want to train the intellect, it seeks to encompass the whole package, the mind, the body, and the soul. It's also deeply collectivist, tightly woven into community life, and relies heavily on the Guru-Shishya tradition. In that tradition, the teacher isn't just up there reciting facts, they are a deeply involved moral and spiritual mentor.
And just like in the West, this philosophy is championed by some absolute foundational thinkers. Swami Vivekananda was all about character building and value-based education. He famously described education as the manifestation of the perfection already in man. Mahatma Gandhi strongly advocated for Nai Talim, or basic education, which completely focused on experiential learning by doing, alongside practical vocational training. Rabindranath Tagore pushed for child-centric classrooms that were deeply connected to nature and highly focused on creative expression. And Sri Aurobindo brought us integral education, seeking this perfect, harmonious balance of physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual growth.
And this brilliantly illustrates where the magic actually happens. On one side, you have the Western thinker John Dewey and his highly pragmatic, hands-on, inquiry-based learning.
On the exact other side, you have the Indian thinker Mahatma Gandhi and his Nayi Talim, which also strictly emphasizes vocational training and that experiential learning by doing. Despite coming from totally different cultural, historical, and philosophical starting points, their conceptual goals run exactly parallel. They both hit the nail on the head. Humans simply learn best by interacting with the real world.
All right, Section 4, Bridging East and West.
Because, hey, we don't live in isolated silos anymore. These two distinct paradigms are experiencing a super powerful bidirectional synthesis in our modern globalized world. Globalization has literally caused these philosophies to flow in both directions. There's a distinct flow to the east, where you'll see classrooms in India and across Asia increasingly incorporating interactive Western technologies, democratic dialogue, and these really flexible modular institutional structures. But simultaneously, there's a massive flow to the west. Western schools are rapidly embracing Indian-inspired concepts. Think mindfulness, yoga, and social-emotional learning, largely to combat intense student burnout. Modern project-based learning is, in many ways, a totally seamless blend of Dewey's pragmatism and Gandhi's experiential focus.
Let's look at Section 5, Real-World Impact, India's NEP 2020.
To ground all these high-level philosophical concepts into reality, let's look at a nationwide framework. India's NEP 2020 is a prime, real-world example of this exact philosophical convergence. Let's see how this builds. It actively merges Gandhian character building and Tagore's focus on creative freedom right alongside Western principles of a liberal arts education. It introduces high flexibility with credit-based, modular higher education, complete with multiple entry and exit options, which is inspired directly by American and European formats. At the exact same time, it emphasizes early child-centric play-based learning, which is a lot like the Western Montessori method, while deeply integrating Indian knowledge systems, local traditions, and core ethics into a technologically advancing framework. It is literally the East and the West, beautifully synthesized into actual policy.
And finally, Section 6, the 21st Century Toolkit.
So why does comparing a bunch of historical thinkers actually matter for educators, policymakers, and students today? Well, because blending these philosophies doesn't just give us a cool, interesting theory, it creates a highly actionable, comprehensive educational toolkit. By combining these approaches, we get updated teaching practices that are both holistic and experiential. We get a curriculum design that doesn't just stress out about passing the next standardized test, but actively combines deep moral values with highly practical, ready-for-the-real-world vocational skills. And ultimately, it leads to educational policies that are completely adaptable to a fast-paced global economy while remaining deeply, meaningfully relevant to the local culture.
So, the crucial point is this final takeaway. Effective 21st century education fundamentally requires a synthesis of both of these paradigms. Western philosophy provides the vital body of education, the scientific frameworks, the critical engagement, the logic, and the democratic structures you absolutely need to navigate a modern economy. But Indian philosophy provides the indispensable soul, the focus on deep moral values, self-realization, inner harmony, and community connection. Think about it. A body without a soul is just mechanical, right? But a soul without a body lacks the practical structure to function in the world. Together and only together, they create the complete learner.
Which leaves us with this final question. Whether you're a teacher designing your next lesson, a policymaker drafting a huge framework, or really just a lifelong learner yourself, how will you integrate both the body and the soul of learning into your own educational journey? Finding that perfect balance between external
Thank you for watching. Kindly like, share and subscribe our channel.